Damas y caballeros, welcome back to Freeform Radio on the Freeform Network. Remember, send in those questions and suggestions to ffnquestions@gmail.com. We're trying to get another podcast going with a bunch of listener emails, so keep those coming in. But for one of your hosts, my name is Daniel. Right next to me today is Andy.
Hulkamaniac Andy is back at it with the... I'm kind of excited about this documentary, so I can't wait to jump into it.
Heck yeah, man. Continuing on with our documentary review series here. We got another documentary to talk about and review and give our thoughts on. And it's right up our alley, Andy, the Andre the Giant documentary made by HBO. It was made in April 2018, so just recently, a little over a year ago. And, for a wrestling documentary, it was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. Just quick thoughts on it. It was very well put together. It had everything from his start of his career, his midpoint, and then to the very end of his career and his life. So I thought it was very well put together. What's some quick thoughts that you have on it, Andy?
I mean, overall, it was pretty good. Initially, I only knew growing up Andre. I knew kind of him in the mid '80s, but by then he was kind of old, and the feud with Hulk Hogan, he was just kind of like a good guy, and then they turned him bad guy, and they presented him as like, this guy's unfucking unbeatable. But the documentary sheds light into like real. I mean, early on you see some footage that I've never seen. He's really young. He's lean. He's like agile. He's doing, crazy shit. And like, I've never seen that footage. And, goes into his personal life down to the end. And you kind of hear some, like, Vince McMahon rarely gives his thoughts on like how he feels about wrestlers. I mean, he gives some like praise, but he was really in depth with this documentary. So overall, it's pretty solid. I know on Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, it got really high reviews, and I agree with it. It's something I would probably recommend to everybody.
Right, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like 94%.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty high score. Even though Rotten Tomatoes throughout the past few years have kind of lost a little bit on the scale that
street credibility.
Right, because there's been some issues with them, but either way, 94 is a pretty high score for a movie, and I think it warrants it. I think for if you're any kind of wrestling fan, this is a must see. I wasn't a huge Andre the Giant fan. I was a Hulk Hogan fan, so when they did have their fight with each other, that's when I started paying more attention to Andre the Giant. But before then, I gave him the props for what he was, such a huge man, and he was an attraction and a big event when you saw him wrestle. But I wasn't really a huge fan, even though he was a babyface for the majority of his wrestling career.
Yeah, exactly. It's they have a lot of footage. I mean, you rarely get to see. I think the earliest footage growing up, I remember getting a tape, and they were talking about Hulk Hogan and Andre at Shea Stadium. It's like early '80s, and I seen that match before, but I mean, there was stuff here from the '70s, like in '60s, and some of that footage I've never ever seen. So I don't know where they found it. I know WWE co-produced this film with HBO, so that's how they were able to get a lot of footage. But yeah, man, it's the early stuff was it was crazy, and then you hear some legendary stories.
So Andy, why don't you kick it off? Give us a little bit taste of where this man was from. The documentary does a very good job of visiting some of his brothers and family members that's still alive and interview them. Give us a little start of where this man was born and where he came from.
So, he came from France, and they go early into the documentary. They're showing clips of Andre and like how special he was. I mean, that's a word that Vince McMahon used. He was special, and they show him growing up. You know, he was somewhat of an athlete. Uh,
Yeah, he
and
played rugby, right?
rugby and so forth. So they kind of like jumped into his early childhood. They had some pictures of him like he was a big kid. And he started growing like around 15. He just had like this enormous spurt, like between 13 and 15.
Right.
You know, he was an athlete. He played a lot of sports as growing up. And then, like, somewhere along the line, he was introduced to wrestling. And that's when you see this early footage of him. I got written down here from 1966. He's, you know, training with this guy. And by then, he was like, I think he was maybe over 7 foot already, maybe. And he's bouncing around in the ring. And it's like really, really young Andre. And to me, I was kind of shocked. I've never seen anything, any footage or pictures of him, you know, so fucking young. I mean, even Biography Channel did something on him like 10, 15 years ago. I mean, they had pictures of him, but they didn't have no footage of him. This was actual footage of him wrestling and training. And to me, it was, I think that was like a rare find. I don't know where the hell they got that from.
Right, right. Because I mean, it's like the late '60s, like you mentioned, early '70s, and he's got a slender build,
Yeah.
and he towers over these guys, and he doesn't look like the Andre the Giant, which most people might remember him as looking like. So he definitely looks super young, and the documentary mentions that wasn't he didn't want to be a wrestler at the very start. He was just working out for rugby, or he was playing rugby. I guess that's something that's important in France or something. I don't know. I don't know this rugby stuff.
Is popular across the world, Danny.
Is it, man?
For me, it's only American.
For me, it's only football and baseball,
yeah,
man.
Yeah, soccer, rugby, you can stick it, but yes, it's very, it's very popular all across the world. Not in the United States.
I'm only joking, but yeah. So, I guess the wrestlers took an eye to him, and yeah, it's a really cool footage of seeing him in the ring just manhandle these people. And like you mentioned, he was very agile, very, he was still able to move around and actually pull off a couple of wrestling moves, to where if you watch the entire documentary and you see towards the end, he was very limited in what he could do because of his size and because of some of his health issues towards the end of his career. But it's very cool to see him here at a young age and really, be able to do some wrestling maneuvers and really look, the part of a wrestler.
Yeah, it's extraordinary footage. I mean, today, everything's fucking recorded, with phones and all this other shit. But it isn't, like I said, I'm 1966, and wrestling at that day, with the kayfabe, they go in there and they're recording. I guess it's maybe news footage because they're kind of interviewing him, of him training, and so again, it's extraordinary footage. It's an Andre that I've never ever seen. So I thought that was pretty fucking cool. I think WWE should buy that footage up. But moving along, so he's going into training, and then they call him. They have names for him like Jean Pierre. I think it was one of the names, and then they try to make him like a lumberjack. And you see
Right.
footage of him like cutting down trees and shit, which was weird. I've never seen that either. And he's just like, yes, I'm a lumberjack and I'm training by chopping down wood trees.
What's kind of funny is it's really akin to the old WWE, where they would have a new wrestler coming in and they would have these promos where they would just be in a natural setting, and then somebody would come and interview them and they'd be like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, oh, right now I'm chopping trees, but next I'm gonna be chopping down the wrestlers at blah blah blah, or whatever, So it was really cool to see that even back in the 1960s, they were still doing stuff that I recall when I was watching wrestling when I was younger.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's like he's chopping down the tree, they're asking him questions, but he's all like relaxed. It ain't like, 80s. I'm gonna get you Hogan, and he has like the heavy accent. I know he's speaking in French, but he's talking, and then he's just like, yeah, I'm chopping down trees here, man. I'm in training because I'm ready to wrestle so and so. And I'm like, it's just very strange. And like, he has like the flannel shirt on, the suspenders, and he's just chopping down trees and shit. So yeah, it's an interesting look. Like again, that I learned something. I can, I consider myself someone of a rest, not a historian, but I think I know a lot about 80s and shit. But that was interesting to see. So he gets a bunch of different names around Europe, and around this time he starts going into Japan. And in Japan, they're like amazed by him, and they call him they kind of, I think they, if I remember correctly, they call him like a monster fear or something. They start introducing him like some type of monster, like destroying all these Japanese wrestlers, and like the Japanese are like amazed by how how big he is.
Right. Yeah, they do call him something like monster something or other. Um, but yeah, the Fier, I guess it's some type of hero in France, or I don't
Yes,
know, it's like some type of like folklore hero.
it's like they're Paul Bunyan almost.
Right. So I guess that's why they gave him that name. And Jean, I don't know, it was just some generic first name. But yeah, Fier, I guess it's some type of local hero. And then yeah, like you mentioned, monster in Japan, because that was like one of the first territories that he went after he left France to pursue his wrestling career.
So yeah, he goes there. He starts going a lot to Japan, and the other place he goes to is Montreal. And then in Montreal, they start calling him like Monster Fier or like Lumberjack Fier, and sometimes they call him Giant Man. And so he's between Japan and Montreal, and then that's when he really starts getting famous by the promoters here in the United States, and they start bringing him in here in Chicago. One of the interesting tidbit for us being Chicagoans, it was the first time he was called like Andre the Giant, and that was the first time they used that in any promotion was here in Chicago.
Right, right. Yeah, it's kind of cool that they were the ones that kind of tagged him with that name, the name that stuck with him for the rest of his career. And yeah, like you mentioned, during that period of him in Canada, they tried out a few different varieties or variations of, Fier, the monster, the giant. But it wasn't until he came here in the good old Chi Town that he got his name that he would carry for the rest of his life. And it's funny, man. It's like it was the first time they kind of started announcing even his maximum height, which was 7'4",
Yeah,
and they were touting him to be over 500 pounds. So
yeah, he was
it's
ranging in the
ridiculous.
weight. Yeah, that's one thing. He was like 500, 515. Sometimes they announced him 525, but he was always between that range. And I always wondered if he actually weighed that, or he weighed less, or he weighed more. But they just kept pushing that 500 pounder.
Yeah, I think even there's a part in the documentary that Vince McMahon's like, I know he was at least 7 foot. He's like, I don't know where the 4 inches came from. He's like, but he's like, you just if he says he's 7'4", he's 7'4".
It's like kayfabe, bro.
Right,
Kayfabe. Yeah, we
right.
just sell it. Don't tell the marks.
And for the people out there, Andy, what's kayfabe?
Kayfabe is like some old wrestling term where fans or people who are not in wrestling, they used to say like kayfabe, brother, and then so that means you're selling your persona, your gimmick. So like if you're a bad guy, you're a good guy, you fucking you start arguing because you're not supposed to like acknowledge, or not acknowledge, but you're not like friendly. You guys hate each other, or like don't be yourself. So that's what that means. And today that's just out the window. Us growing up, like there's a let me tell you a quick story. So Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik, they were wrestling.
I must
Sheik,
humble you.
yeah, I must humble you. He fucking there was a point because Hacksaw Jim Duggan was with the USA flag, the Sheik was with Iran, and he's like all this bullshit, and they booked them all across the Northeast. The Vince McMahon WWF or WWE, they traveled together, and one time they got pulled over. They were together. They were smoking a blunt together, and they got arrested together. And this broke out in the mainstream. Like, what? These guys hate each other. Why are they riding together? Why they got busted with marijuana? Like, I thought they hated each other, and like they broke kayfabe basically, and they got in trouble for it. They demoted, I think, Hacksaw, and I think the Iron Sheik got let go of it for a while, and because there wasn't kayfabe, brother.
Right, right. I think the big part about it too is that maybe some of our younger listeners can't imagine, but back in the day when this was not televised nationwide, it was still believed that wrestling was real and it was still a sport. It was still something that was not entertainment. The word entertainment was not used with wrestling back in the 70s, 80s, and into even the 90s a little bit. So the kayfabe was to protect the industry,
The
to not
business.
right to not release it that the outcomes are planned, most of the matches are called. So it was to give that illusion that anything could happen in the ring because this is sports, just like basketball, football. The outcome is unknown. So that's where the term kayfabe comes from.
And in the documentary, they talk about it a little bit. Tim White, we know him as a WWE referee for a while.
Right.
I didn't know he was Andre's handler or he helped him out. And he talks about when he first got into the business, and only the certain guys, wrestlers, were allowed in the locker room and referees. And he did like one match, and he was just like, "Oh, I'm in the business now,"
Right.
and he like squid out because he's protecting the business. He's like, "I don't know who this guy is. He's an outsider. He can't be in here and know what the fuck's going on." So he threw him out. So that's kind of what it's about too.
Right. I mean, I listen to a couple of wrestling podcasts, and there's one that I listen to, Keeping It 100 with Conan, and he talks about that every now and then. That since he's somewhat of a promoter in Mexico, and how sometimes in the locker rooms there'll be people that he doesn't recognize, and he'll be like, "Who the hell are you?" And "Who the hell are you?" "Oh, I came with so and so." "I mean, you guys can't be in here. You guys got to get out of here. And he still tries to keep somewhat of an old school locker room where the fans are not allowed in. It's only the wrestlers and the referees. So it's something that's kind of dying away. But yeah, like you mentioned, this guy Tim White, which I was the same way. I didn't know he had any kind of relations to Andre the Giant or his handler. Which for a handler is just a guy that kind of rides with him and helps him get food. Kind of helps him out in whatever he needs. That I just knew him as a referee, and for him to give a couple inside stories to Andre was very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's kayfabe, guys. So getting back to the documentary, so he's traveling around in the territories, and he's doing great. And then Vince McMahon Senior sees him, and he brings him in, but he's the first one to say like, "Man, look at this guy. This guy's a fucking giant. He's like, this is one of a kind thing." He builds him as an attraction, and you see
Right, the eighth
videos of,
wonder of the world.
yes, you see him like lifting like enormous weights and like doing all this crazy, like this motherfucker's strong, and people are like, "Oh shit!" And then he starts booking them in like handicap matches and a lot of battle royals, and from there his aura starts to build. Like this guy is like super strong. No one's gonna beat him, and that's where this mythology starts, and
Right.
it's interesting to see some of that footage that they threw in there.
Yeah, it's even cool to see that he had somewhat of a little bit of a career outside of wrestling because for like a promotional thing, he actually tried out for the Redskins team, the football team,
Yeah.
the Redskins.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was at a younger age, he was the Sasquatch in the $6 Million Man movie. So it was cool to see that even though his wrestling career was just taking off, that he was starting to kind of dabble in the movie industry a little bit.
So they have them. From my understanding, they don't deal with it. I think they have them exclusively, and then you read about how Andre was loaned out to more territories, and they go into his professional a little bit. Vince McMahon Sr. loaned them out to other territories. Then that's when you start seeing Hogan pop up along with other people like Mean Gene, Shane McMahon, Vince McMahon, Hogan, Jerry Lawler, Dave Meltzer, Schwarzenegger, Ric Flair, Tim Wright, and this wrestling historian that I never heard of, David Shoemaker. So they're
Even
in there.
Billy Crystal.
Yeah, Billy Crystal from when
Yeah.
he made in the movie. So everybody's giving input, but the one that I concerned myself most was like the wrestlers at that time when at his peak. Hogan makes a comment that Andre always won, but he sold when he was fighting other wrestlers or having matches with them. He made them look good by like when he would take a punch or a slam. He sold for him like, damn, this guy's strong, but he always won. Like, I'll make your guy look good, but I'm gonna fucking win.
Right. And I think Jerry the King Lawler also mentioned something to that effect, that that he was a very giving man, and that he was willing to sell the entire match for you, and you could beat him down, but at the end of the day, he was going over and he was getting his hand raised.
So that's why the documentary is going like, nobody could beat him. He was tough. He was truly a giant, and like he said, he was unbelievable strong. And at this point, you see like that famous picture of him holding like a 12-ounce can of beer, and it's like his
he like
hands
dwarfs
big.
it.
Yeah, like it looks almost like a toy, and it's like a famous picture of that they put up there. And it's an amazing picture, and then they're going into how tough he is, and then they start talking about his like lifestyle, like fucking hot. Andre can drink, man. Like, you heard some of these stories, like it was unfucking unbelievable. Granted, he was a giant man. Like, we drink that much, we'd be fucking dead.
Right. I guess for the most part, they kind of allude to that. All wrestlers kind of drink a little bit after matches. They get together, have a 6-pack, 12-pack, and just kind of chill out and relax. But I guess Andre took it to the extreme, and he would douse down, 224-packs, like bottles of wines. I think at one point somebody mentions 6 bottles of wine at one time. Flair even mentioned 106 beers between both of them. So,
and Flair can drink himself.
Right. He's known himself as a good drinker.
Yeah, like I said, the 106 beers, that's like an insane amount of beers. Yeah, I remember him when I got 25 beers, like the 6 bottles of wine, and he was still drinking some liquors, 4 bottles of something,
Cognac.
And then and they would so you imagine him getting so like Pat Patterson talks about a little bit, like he fucking passed out by the elevator. Remember that?
Right, that he's coming back to the hotel and
he passes out drunk, and they're like, "What are you gonna do about it?" Like, well, I ain't doing shit. You can just leave him there. Like, we ain't gonna move him. And like, there's no way we can move him. Like, call AAA. And then he wakes up and he's just there sitting by the elevator, just sleeping still. So, I mean, it's just it's an insane amount of liquor this man can drink. It's unbelievable. And the other thing he enjoyed a lot was fucking. I mean, you talk about how Hogan and Vince McMahon talks about, like, the ladies were just attracted to him. Like, I guess, Flair talks about, you see the size of his feet, you see the size of his hand. It's like, imagine what the size of his other thing is. Like, you know what they wanted.
Right. Yeah, and it does got to be kind of like something unique, and something it's got to give an allure to maybe women that are curious to be like, let me check this big man out and see what he's all about. There's definitely something to him. And at that age, he was still not, I think, as big as he ended up being when he retired. So he was still somewhat athletic, big, and, he had a somewhat good look, still at that age, where the disease that he hadn't totally dwarfed or deformed his head, because I think towards the end you kind of see it a little bit in his skull that it got a little deformed. So I think at that age and at that time of his career, I could see how women would be attracted to him, as something different and something unique.
And another thing, I mean, he was famous. I mean, he was on TV shows like The $6 Million Man. He was on all these, wrestling stuff, wrestling territories. He was well known. I mean, this guy, and then again, he was tall. So this wasn't like just some tall dude. Like he was world famous, and he did a lot of media. So he's starting to get known, and I mean, women are attracted to that, and they just wanted to know if it was true what they said about him.
Right. And like you mentioned, Andy, world famous. The documentary takes mention that he was in New Zealand for a while. He was in Japan. He did multiple stints in Canada, in Europe. So yeah, by world famous, it's literally world famous. He really traveled around. Just because the documentary also mentions that you can't have him wrestling day in day not out. If it was in today's WWE environment, he would almost be like a Brock Lesnar type of schedule where he only comes out for pay-per-views, and that's about it. He wouldn't be a daily wrestler because you do want to keep that bigness that this is an attraction kind of thing.
Well, absolutely. Like I said, the way we have that they McMahon's booked him. I mean, when we saw him, he was always on Saturday night's main event and like all the pay-per-views at that time after like WrestleMania. He was just in about all of them. So he started, but again, he was towards the end of his career. At this time, yeah, he was an attraction. Like they booked him, the handicaps and the battle royals. So, um, yeah, getting back to the wrestling a little bit. If Hogan, like nobody, they're talking about how tough he was. If no one could beat him up, and if he hated you, man, he was gonna whoop your ass. Like Hogan talks about how he hated Macho Man, he hated Big John Studd, and he just beat the shit out of him. I think one time they talk about how he beat the shit out of the Iron Sheik, and like Big John Studd's like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. This man's gonna kill me because just because he climbed over the rope, and Andre's like, that's my gimmick, brother. So he's beat the shit out of him. I mean, I even heard a story that he shit on somebody in the ring. Did you ever hear that one?
No, no. I know there's a bunch of different like folklore stories, like he shit in some guy's luggage, and stuff like that. But no, I never heard about him shitting on somebody in the ring.
I think it was Ben Hughes Brown. I could be wrong, but then he did something, and he just like he sat him. You know how he sits on them on the corner rope,
Right.
and he ripped it, and it was nasty, dude.
It's weird how the documentary even makes mention of him farting a lot. Like
Yeah,
he had that habit of,
flatulence.
letting
Damn it.
one rip. Yeah, it's funny how Vince McMahon calls it flashiness. I was just like, damn, man, why can't he just say fart?
I think
Because when they
fart's
get
unclassy.
when they get to Mean Gene, Mean Gene's is like, oh yeah, he's a giant, so he would have giant farts.
Yeah, and even Hogan like mimics, and I think Vince McMahon does too. And it goes into he's a fart machine, but the other thing the documentary dwells on is his level of comfort, like being such a giant man. Can you imagine going to the bathroom and trying to take a shower or sleeping? Like his level of comfort, it's something that he never, I guess, had a good quality of comfort because you see pictures of him. He's taking up two seats on airplanes, and he can't use that bathroom. I mean, it's something that nobody thinks about because we're all somewhat normal sized, but something for a human being that tall in the world how it is, that must be a big fucking burden on you. Like they kind of talk about it like it must not make you feel comfortable at any time, or it's a struggle. I guess what I'm trying to say.
Right, right. I mean, I'm not as tall as Andre the Giant. I'm like 6'2", a little over 6 foot. So when I bought my Corolla, it was definitely an adjustment because smaller cars are made for average size people, and when you have somebody that's a little taller, small cars are a little bit of a pain in the ass. And the movie does go into it, like Andy said. he wouldn't be able to use the bathroom at an airlines because they're small as hell as it is. Even when I go in there, it's a struggle. It's like you can't really move left and right. The only thing you could do is kind of like twirl in a circle to go towards the urinal, then go towards the sink to wash your hands. There's really no area to move. It's more like you're standing in an area and just kind of going in a circle. So I could imagine a big man like that. How would you even sit down on a toilet or you know I'm not sure if this documentary goes into it, or I've heard of other ones where there would be times that he'd have to take a shit inside the bathtub because he wouldn't be able to use the toilet itself, because it's made for a normal sized person. And with him being as big as he was, that he would shit in the bathtub and then pay somebody to come in and clean it up because he just couldn't use the normal facilities the way other people's do.
Yeah, I think that's the documentary kind of they dance around it. So you're
Right.
thinking like, what the fuck does he do, right? Um, so yeah, that's something that it's uh, it's one of the issues he had, and it must suck, dude. Like clothes, I'm pretty sure all his clothes had to get made. Like you just see that ring and one of the promos he's doing with Mean Gene. He has this ring, like it's a size 22 ring, and it's like solid gold. And Mean Gene put his index finger and his middle finger and the other one. He put all three fingers in there, and I'm like, that's how big one of his fingers was. Like my wedding ring is a size 10, and I was like, when he said that, I'm like, holy shit, that is a huge fucking ring.
Right. Yeah, he's just a different size man living in a smaller size world for sure.
So yeah, another thing, he liked to he's a very sociable guy with his co-workers, the boys. He liked playing cards with them. Mean Gene kind of gave more of a in-depth things about more. I feel like he gave a lot of information on him. He talked about he was a very sensitive person that if you made fun of him, it hurt him a lot. He was almost like that he would cry about it, and he had a lot of feelings, and he just didn't really share it with too many people. But when people made fun of him or look at him, and he that hurt him. I was kind of shocked to hear about that. Somebody who's so famous uh, didn't know how to deal with that, and I was kind of shocked by those comments that Mean Gene said.
Right. I mean, I think it goes back a little bit to what we mentioned before, the kayfabe, is that when you're out in public, you're this big, mean giant. You're like this huge, undefeatable man. And when people would make fun of him, because, people could be mean and cruel at times. You walk down the street, and Hogan mentioned it as well, that, Andre would be walking in front of him and he'd be a few steps or, a few paces behind him. And he would hear people talk about him as he passed by, that, look at that freak or whatever. And that those kind of things did hurt him. And maybe he only let that part of his feelings known to the boys because, he didn't want to break kayfabe with the public.
Yeah, like I said, Mean Gene, very retrospective. He had some great input on this documentary, and um, I mean, you don't want to think I'm like, oh, he's a fucking giant, man. Like, but that he would cry and it hurt. The comments hurt him. It was kind of revealing, and I thought he'd be like, whatever, man. But so like it was just it was very interesting to hear that, and the documentary also they talk about how people bothered them a lot. Hogan, you kind of heard about what Danny said. Hogan said. So from when all this is going on, he decides to build his ranch in North Carolina. He just said bought this ranch. It was like in North Carolina. He loved living there because people didn't bother him, and he had this ranch. He built it up. He could be himself, and he had these people living with him, the caretakers. And then that's when you kind of hear about the ranch, and he could be himself at the ranch, and that's the first time you hear about his daughter. But he had a daughter, but I don't know. They kind of talk about him. I don't know if he wanted to be in the documentary, but Uh, I don't want to say it was an estranged. I guess it was an estranged relationship, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on that, Manny.
Yeah, I mean, her name was Robin, and they said something to the fact of the mother was in the West Coast somewhere. Um, and yeah, being a kid of a wrestler, I mean, I could only speak to the few documentaries that I've seen on Hogan, some of Hogan's TV shows that he's done. It's a strain on the kids, man. It's tough. It's tough being a family member of a wrestler. They're constantly traveling. I mean, can you imagine that? You're having your baseball game and you want your dad to show up, but he's in Japan doing a tour, and he's not there to see you hit your first home run. It's tough being a kid of a wrestler, and I think Andre the Giant knew that, and he, you know, maybe didn't have as close a relationship with the mother and with his daughter Robin, just because of that. And then they kind of mentioned that the mom didn't want the kid to have anything to do with wrestling. So I don't know if it was like a bittersweet, relationship between Andre and the mother, to the fact that the mom didn't want Robin to be close to wrestlers or to be grown up with wrestlers.
So yeah, they delve on that, and this whole time that's going on, this is now we're into like the 80s. He breaks his ankle, and he goes to the doctor. He gets surgery. He's out for a while. That's what they talk about his condition, that acromegaly, or what's it called, Danny? Do you remember?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Acromedaly, something like that.
yeah, Manjoli or something. I got it written here, but I don't know how to spell it. But
Yeah, I should have wrote the uh, phonetic way of. Is that right? The phonetic. Uh,
phonetic, yeah.
how do you say it?
I only went to some college people. So he's out of it for a while. I mean, his ankle, the doctor, they talk like this ankle's like the size of, like, this ain't a normal ankle here. So it takes some time for him to heal. They tell him about his disease. They tell him, like, we could kind of help you slow down this condition. But he didn't want to. He refused it, and he just like, fuck it. I'm gonna live every day or whatever. And it was you know, he refuses. There's some that you can't stop it. There's no cure, but they could kind of help him. And he refused any type of medical help because he thought it would endanger his career.
Right, right. Like you said, Andy, the disease cannot be cured, but it can be mitigated to the point where your organs will stop growing in excess, and you would stop having issues like he was having towards the end of his life. And yeah, it kind of goes a little bit into it, if just him living with this, gigantism or the technical term that we can't pronounce. It was rough, man. It was rough to see that part of the documentary. I think that's when the documentary kind of took a little bit of a turn, because before that, it's like the building up, and man, he's larger than life,
He's the
and
man.
he's the
Yeah.
man. His wrestling career, and I think at this point in the documentary, it starts getting a little real, and it starts getting a little sad. You start feeling bad for the guy on his struggles in life, living in a smaller world, his estranged daughter, and then now him having to battle with some of the late year effects of this disease, and him having to battle and decide to not do anything about it, because like you said,
And
he didn't want to endanger his wrestling career.
and he had his ankle surgery, and him being a bigger person, it might take longer to heal. So all this shit's going on. And now it's like mid 80s. There's cable TV. Hulk Hogan's on the scene. He's the fucking man. He's running wild, fucking up Iron Sheik. Hulkamania's born. They're getting mainstream coverage. He's on Sports Illustrated. Um, he's fucking everywhere. He got a cartoon, man. He got vitamins. Like, this is our bread and butter right here, Danny. We all fucking know Hogan's unstoppable. Um, in the meantime, Andre's on the fucking sidelines. As they talk about in the documentary. So, they're pushing. I mean, like, fucking Hogan's the man. We all knew that. I don't need to be told that. I already knew that.
Right.
So this is all going on. Andre kind of heals up. He goes makes the movie Prince of Brides, and I've never seen the Prince of Bride. I don't know if you've seen it, Danny.
No, I don't usually like watching garbage movies.
Shit, man. So we'll just jump over that. Someone send us something, or maybe we'll review it one of these days.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like a pretty, Robin Hood type movie. It didn't look, hugely bad, but I never cared to watch it, and I haven't watched it up to now.
So that leads us up to the Hogan Andre feud, right? And like I remember all this shit right here. They're showing us clips. He's doing the Piper's Pit.
Yeah,
Heenan
that's what
comes up.
really starts it off.
Yeah. So they get in there, and he shows up, and Andre's just like fucking dick mode, and Heenan shows up, and Hogan's like he has the strap, he's never lost it. I think he hasn't lost in like 3 or 4 years. And Andre's like, I want a fucking title shot. And everybody knows that nobody could beat Andre. So this is like fucking 80s extravaganza here. And, remember that moment where he rips the chain off? Hogan's bleeding. He's fucking crying. Andre just walks off. He's like, I want the fucking belt. And like right there, man, it's just like, fuck, I'm having flashbacks of like, I remember seeing that shit. And I was like, damn, this is the shit right here.
Right. I remember vividly watching that on TV as a kid and just going like, holy shit, this is going to be the biggest challenge Hogan's ever had. And it's going to be crazy. And I know you mentioned that the Giant had a few losses by then, but since the WWE was just going national, they were touting him as being undefeated, even though he did actually, in reality, have a couple losses. But that was back when the wrestling business was split up into territories. So it was tough to know what he did in Mid-Atlantic South because, the same people that were watching that program were watching WWE at that time or any other different territory. So you didn't know about his wins and losses so much. So when Vince McMahon was touting that he was undefeated, that even added more to the tension that Hogan was gonna have to surmount this man that's never been defeated and actually beat him to keep his belt.
Yeah, because they were pushing as Hogan hasn't lost in like forever, and like Andre hasn't lost. There, I think I wrote on here somewhere like that he's 15 years undefeated. No one's hasn't beaten him, and they were pushing that. And then the back to the Piper's Pit, you see him, he's there like fucking Hogan shaking and crying, and Piper's like, what is it? What's it gonna be? And Hogan's like, yes, with this corny acting, but and then you hear like that pop from that crowd where he's at, and like that just said it all right there, man. Like everybody knew this shit was gonna be fucking huge because Hogan at that time, he was the fucking man. He was unstoppable, and I was just like, man, I don't know how he's as a kid. I'm like, I don't know, man. Andre never loses either, and like, but I'm like, I don't know. He could kick out of that leg drop, so it was like a monumental fucking match, man. Leading up to that, they had that press conference. I don't know if you remember that, and like Andre doesn't fucking almost say anything.
Right, he's just sitting
at
at
him.
that table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's like sweating and shit. And fucking Hogan's going crazy, like all you needed to do was ask, brother. And Heenan's doing all the talking, and he signs it and he just gives him like that grin, like, yeah, I'm gonna fuck you up. I was like, damn, man, like that shit was crazy back in the day, like that, and like that got me hyped up. And back in the day, it was like very limited pay-per-view. You had to do closed circuit television. Like we didn't have money to order that shit. That was like fucking killing me I couldn't see that match live.
Right. Yeah, just taking a time warp, man. It like you said, Andy, my parents weren't super parents of means, so I sometimes had to wait until the wrestling event came to home video, and then I would see it at my local Action Videos or whatever, and then I would grab the movie and go like, oh, this is the Hogan match, and then I would go see it. Just because, like Andy said, closed circuit TV and pay-per-views were a little tough to come by back in the day. But yeah, man, it was it was something that was like out of this world, man. I remember, like you said, Andy, I could hear it in your voice, the excitement, and that's the excitement of a wrestling kid and still having that kayfabe where this shit was still real to you, damn it. And it's like it's crazy, man.
Yeah, it was I mean, like we said, man, where I was a kid and like I watched wrestling like every weekend. I watched for those syndicated shows, and when I saw this after that press conference too, I was like, and they kept hyping it up every week. There was like an update because they're trying to get people to order the pay per view or closed circuit television. And I was like, Hogan's like 6'6" and Andre's 7'4" and this and that. And I was just like, man, he's so fucking big. But Hulkamania is like I'm like he's not gonna be able to do shit to him because Andre was unbeatable.
Yeah, because that brings up a good point, Andy. That Vince McMahon was trying to sell out the Pontiac Silverdome, which was
Right.
going to be a huge thing just by itself. And then pay per views were just taking off, closed circuit TV, so it was a huge task to build up this match. And I think another quick thing we should mention, Andy, is that at this point the documentary makes mention of the Giant's health and how he was having back
Yes.
issues, his neck, his knees. He was very limited mobility. He was really struggling at this point, and he was just not wanting to get much aid as far as trying to get better.
Yeah, they dove into it like he kind of they portrayed as McMahon asking him like, "Come on, Andre, it's your last shot," blah blah blah. But Dave Meltzer makes it sound like, "Oh, you need to do this. Don't get the." I think they're debating if he needed surgery. He's like, "Don't do it or do it," but I need you ready for this day, and like that's what we're gonna do.
Right. I think they saw how long it took for his ankle to recover.
Yeah,
That a lot of people, they're like, if you want to wrestle in the future, you cannot have this surgery, because if you have this surgery, you're going to be laid out forever, and you'll never be back in the ring again. So I think he figured, let me get my last couple matches I can in my condition before, or even if I ever decide to get the surgery, because I probably won't ever wrestle again.
so yeah, so WrestleMania 3, the build-up's fucking intense. They sell out the Silver Dome. It's a big fucking event. I mean, they had mainstream media coverage, and so the whole time leading up to this, Hogan is like, "Hey, brother, so what's the finish? Like, who's gonna go over this?" And Vince and everybody else, he kind of talks about it's like they're giving me the runaround. Because it's the Giant. He doesn't let no one beat him unless he decides to. And they kind of allude to Andre was kind of fucking with Hogan, like, well, we'll see. And then so I found that interesting. Even Tim White says Vince McMahon didn't even know the finish till the day of, because everybody just kept telling Hogan, oh, Andre's gonna do the right thing. So what does that mean? Like, is he gonna go over? Am I going over? What are we gonna do here?
Right. And you kind of hear about this even nowadays with wrestlers like The Undertaker. They have that stigma or that clout like Andre the Giant, where it's like, Undertaker, am I going over? And it's just like, don't worry, we'll call it in the ring, or whatever the Undertaker
Yeah, it's
says.
very old school thing. Like, we'll figure it
Right.
out in the ring. Today, a lot of the wrestlers, they fucking map it out basically.
Right. So it's a very old way of thinking, and how you give respect to the older wrestlers and let them come up with the finish. How's this going to go over? Am I going to win? Is it going to be a strong win? Am I going to get a dirty win? Stuff like that. So it gives you a little insight as to the old schoolness of wrestling.
So uh that's the big debate. And then Hogan, like the day of, was like, "Hey, what are we doing here?" And then Vince is like always, when you hear documentaries or shoot interviews, like, what do you have in mind? So apparently, I don't know how true this is or this is made up. Hogan writes this shit out. Like, this is the first I ever heard of this. He writes out the match and then he just leaves the finish like question marks. And like, so I don't know if that's some like shit that they made up, and that's the story they're sticking with. I've listened to other shoot interviews that people talk about him. I've never heard of that. I found that very interesting because I've never heard of Hogan writing down anything.
Right. I think for the most part, it's discussed and it's kind of just a quick powwow with the heads, the writers, or whoever's involved. Pat Patterson was involved in a lot of matches, or at least the scripting of how the match was going to flow. So, yeah, I've never heard of Hogan writing it down. So I don't know if this was just kind of a little show and tell for the documentary.
They even had the notepad right there. You saw that?
Right. Yeah, I know you mentioned before when we talked about this a little bit briefly, Andy, and you're like, "Do you think that was the legit notepad?" I don't think so. I think that's
That,
somebody just wrote that up really quick. Hey, get something
well,
so
it's
we can film
Hogan's
it.
writing. Did you see that? It was when you see his autograph with the H. It had like Hogan Andre. It looked like his fucking writing. So I think he did that for for the documentary because if that's
Oh wow,
if it's an actual piece that should belong in the fucking museum, man.
wow, wow. No, I didn't realize that
Go
maybe
back and
Hogan
watch
would
it.
have.
It's his
Yeah,
writing.
wow. I just kind of figured it was some kind of producer like, hey, let me just scribble a bunch of stuff on a notepad just so we could film something and make
But
it look real.
that yellow notepad was pretty fucking yellow. So I think it was just for the documentary.
Wow, that'd be crazy.
Yeah, rewatch it. To me, it's his right. I know it's his writing because I've seen his autograph and I got a couple of his autographs. That H is that's his fucking H. So, we all know how it goes. Hogan fucking they lay out the match. Hogan's in the match. He's like, "Oh shit, we're doing the script." And they talk about, it was very limited to what Andre can do. So Hogan carried the match. And he tries to slam him real quick. It doesn't happen. They do a lot of bear hugs. Hogan, at the end, he does slam him, which is a big fucking deal. I mean, to this day, it's still big because you never saw him leave his feet. So he slams him, gives him the boot 1, 2, 3. You fucking it's a clean win. You got the man of the '80s, fucking with the strap up high. They gotta go to Hogan and to retrospect, and you see him like that's an important match, and you see Hogan get all emotional.
Right. I mean, I think that was a huge turning point next to like Iron Sheik and Hogan, where Hogan won the strap and Hulkamania took off running. I think this is another pivotal moment of Hulkamania and where it just took off. And this was Andre the Giant passing the torch to Hogan. And in what would be Andre the Giant's one of his last big matches, if not his last great match, that he was able to actually pull off wrestling before his health really deteriorated. So yeah, this is a great moment for Hulkamania, and I remember seeing this on probably the VHS tape, like I mentioned, and it was just ridiculous, man. I couldn't believe that he got Andre the Giant off of his feet and was able to slam him.
Yeah, it's like the way Hogan reacted. You see him. It's an impactful moment in wrestling history because that solidified Hogan. Andre was the old way. And he beating the Sheik was a big deal. And it's 4 years later, and it's still solidified. Like I'm the fucking man. I'm leading this company forward. And Andre was like, you were the man, but now it's all about me. And they moved the company forward to newer things. And it is a wrestling, big wrestling historical moment. And like nobody could ever take that away from Hogan or Andre.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely a a a big point in Hogan's career where it took him off into a very accelerated like upward trend, and it's kind of sad to see Andre the Giant carted away in one of those little go karts because that was one of the gimmicks they had in WrestleMania 3, where the wrestlers would come down in a cart, and just seeing them kind of carted away with Bobby the Brain Heenan, it was a little sad, man. It was a little sad to see him go away, the defeated man, and uh, especially in the documentary. Maybe when I was a kid, I was just like, yeah, that's what you get, Giant, man. Go back home. But
I was wondering, like, I was watching that with you, and like you see him, and like Heenan has his head down, and there's shit being thrown to him. I was like, would I be one of those persons throwing shit to him? I think I would have been.
yeah, I think so. At least in the moment.
Yes.
But watching it in this documentary, watching that scene unfold, it was sad. Now that you kind of knew some of the backstory as to his career and his life, to where this is sad. He was giving himself to his career and to the business that helped create him. Even though he was having all these health issues and wasn't really able to wrestle or in no condition to wrestle.
So he loses, and then his immediately his health starts going downhill after WrestleMania 3. Um, the WWE is still booking him. He had matches with like Macho Man, Jake the Snake. I just remember distinctly the Jake the Snake Roberts feud. Um, the fucking Snake gave him a heart attack. Remember that Saturday Night's Main Event?
Right, because
You
they
remember
played it
that?
up. Yeah, they
Yeah,
played it up that he was like terrified of snakes.
yeah. And I was like, oh shit, man, they're gonna kill him. And then like he was in the ring, he was grabbing his heart and shit, and the snake was on top of him. I'm like, man, this guy's gonna fucking die right here and live on TV. And so they're showing him how the WWE uses him. I mean, it's less and less shit in the ring, more tag team matches. He starts doing appearances, and there's even one video shot I've never seen. He's coming out to the ring. I don't know exactly what he was doing, but he was in crutches, and that was kind of fucking sad. Like your time's up, and you're like, what can you do, you know? And then they got him wheeling him out, and he's coming out in crutches.
Yeah, I remember one of the few times that we went to like a wrestling convention, or maybe it was like a some type of indie show, and you see some of these older wrestlers selling their gimmicks on tables. And sometimes you see some of these old wrestlers, they're in crutches or wheelchairs. Some of them have diabetes and they had to chop legs off and shit like that. And it's sad, man. It's sad seeing these heroes that you saw when you were a kid, and now seeing them in today and seeing them in the conditions that they are. It is definitely sad to see them like that.
Yeah, I know he did after WWF. He did some he did other promotions, and I did search some footage, and he's just there. It's just an appearance basically.
Right.
And it wasn't like wrestling. He was just there, like, oh, we have Andre the Giant here today, and people, he'd get his little pop, and I was just like, man, like he just doesn't want to hang it up, and um, they
Yeah.
asked, it's. I don't want to say it's sad, man. I know he's still like he got to make a living, but I don't know what all that was about.
Yeah. He's still an attraction at that point. He's still Andre the Giant. He's a huge man. Even though he wasn't able to wrestle very well at that point of his career. Um, I didn't even know this, but in researching a little bit for the documentary, that he made an appearance in WCW in the Clash of the Champions 20
Yeah.
in September 1992, and that he was there. And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know he was in WCW. I always thought he was in WWF or WWE, and then of course like the indie stuff that he did. But yeah, it was crazy to see that. And then even after that, he went to Japan, did a little tour of Japan, and had a couple more matches with Big John Studd. And his very last match was for All Japan Pro Wrestling in 1992, where he wrestled against I can't even pronounce this guy's name, Romisov, something like that. So, man, it's definitely crazy to see that his career to a certain point was extended after the WWE, especially after he wasn't able to wrestle to the extent that he was at his younger age.
Yeah, exactly. It's I know He did a lot of ones after WWF, but I'm reading that the Clash of the Champions was his final U.S. TV appearance before he passed away. So yeah, I mean he's did it. After that, he's pretty much hanging out at the ranch. He goes to France to visit his dad because his dad's just about to pass away. So he goes over there, and then I don't know if he made it before he passed away, but he was there. He's hanging out with his family. He's drinking, and then you see some pictures of him when he's there, and he's like pale. He just doesn't look right.
Right.
And then even some of his handlers and people talk about he just didn't look right. He looked pale. He looked sick. And then he was staying at a hotel in Paris, and then he died, I guess, in his sleep, or he had a heart attack in Paris in 1992, December of 1992, and he was only 46 years old. And they didn't really bug him. It took him, I think, they were like a day or two before they finally went up there and checked on him, and they found that he was dead.
Wow, so it's weird because Wikipedia has at his death was the 27th of January, 1993, at the age of 46.
The documentary said December of 92.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty close to dates, so I'm not sure which is correct. I think I would lean more towards the documentary just because Wikipedia could be edited by anybody. But originally in my notes I had was born 19 of May 1946 and then died the 27th of January 1993.
Yeah, again, so he dies. Then they do this retrospect. I mean, it was they talk about people. Tim White gets emotional because he was his handler. He's like, he has regrets. He feels he should have been with him because he basically just died alone. And he's he has a hard time with it. Even Vince, they talk to him, and then you remember when you talked to him and all this other shit, and he goes, it wasn't a good conversation. I think he was upset. So when stuff like that happens, he's like a robot, dude. He just deletes that from his brain and he don't think about it no more. That's another interesting tidbit that I found. Not about Andre, about Vince McMahon. It just goes to the character of that man. And he goes, I just delete that shit. I don't think about it no more.
Right. Yeah. You kind of see, a bunch of different people getting a little emotional when they're talking about him. Even Hogan, which a lot of people say that it's kind of fake when he does get emotional. So I'm not sure if it was real or not. But yeah, it's Tim White's the one that hit me the most because I could tell that his comments or his feelings towards Andre the Giant were legit, and it was sad to see such a close friend pass away for him. And it was emotional, even though, like I mentioned to you, and at the very start, I wasn't a huge Andre the Giant fan. I wasn't a huge fan, but after watching this documentary, I really did get more of appreciation for him and his career.
So yeah, I mean, they asked Vince. Vince is emotional, and then they asked him. He was something special. So, I mean that's there's no disputing that. So, final thoughts, Danny. What'd you think of Andre? Do you recommend it? Is this I mean, just being I know we're wrestling people, but what do you think? Final thoughts.
To me, I like myself a good documentary. I love watching JFK movies or documentaries when his anniversary comes around. I like watching wrestling documentaries, war documentaries, any kind of really good documentary I really care for. And I think this is one of those that even if you're not a super wrestling fan, it gives a lot of insight into the business, a lot of insight into the man that is Andre the Giant. And I think it's a very well put together documentary by HBO in association with WWE. So I think it's a definite watch for anybody out there. It shows you the life of Andre the Giant, a little history as to the way WWE went national, and a little bit of the rise of Hulkamania.
Yeah, I mean, my final thoughts. It's overall great. It's has the character of this man. I mean, just look at it as a human being. We looked at him as some mythical person, as a giant, and it went into great insight showing how he lived his life outside of the ring. He was an emotional person. He had feelings. People made fun of him. What he did in the ring, outside of the ring, it seems somewhat complicated. He liked to be by himself. But I would recommend this. This is one of the better ones. HBO sports and documentaries are generally, man, they're really great documentaries. They've done hundreds of them. And I watch about anything I watch just because it's HBO. So with that being said, I highly recommend it. This was a special. Vince McMahon says it's a special person, and this documentary it's pretty good. So again, we want to thank you all for listening. Remember, you can follow Freeform Network on Facebook and Twitter under Freeform Network. Also, send your questions and suggestions to ffnquestions@gmail.com. So let us know what you guys think. Hit us up on Twitter or send the email. Let us know what else would you like us to review, and we'll put it on a list and put it to vote. And don't forget to visit our webpage, Freeform Network at Podbean. I'm sorry, Freeform Network, Podbean.com. Shit, I said that a shitload of times. You think I should know it by now? Also, don't you? There, you're gonna see our links to Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, and everything else. And so don't forget to listen and give us the like button on there and subscribe to all of those. Again, this is Freeform Radio. We have Danny.
What you gonna do when Freeform Network comes after you?
And Andy running wild here. Thank you for listening, and see you next week. And hit us up.
Happy 4th of July.
That was cool, Dad.